Nothing hits harder than watching you win in silence, because it proves their noise was never power, just panic. My dear chosen ones, come closer, because the moment you walked back into your life with your head up, something snapped in the people who swore you'd stay small. You felt it, didn't you? The room didn't just get quiet, it got careful. Like everybody suddenly remembered they were dealing with someone they underestimated, like the air itself shifted and said, "Oh, they're not the same anymore." And that's the part that bruises your enemies the deepest. You didn't come back loud. You didn't come back begging. You came back controlled. You came back steady. You came back like someone who finally learned the difference between explaining yourself and proving yourself. And for people who survive off drama, that kind of composure is devastating. Because it's not a reaction they can feed on. It's not a story they can twist. It's not a weakness they can tug on. It's a locked door. Let me say it in a way that lands. When you stop reacting, you stop being reachable. And chosen ones, the second you became unreachable, they became unstable. Now here's what they're not saying out loud, but you can see it in their behavior. They're stunned. The same mouths that used to run like a faucet are suddenly dry. The same people who joked about you are suddenly busy. The same ones who acted like you were nothing are now watching you like you're a headline. Because they didn't expect you to recover. They expected you to fold. They expected you to fall apart publicly so they could point and laugh and feel tall for 5 minutes. But you didn't give them that show, you gave them a plot twist. And chosen ones, nothing humiliates an enemy like a plot twist they can't control. They wanted your breakdown, they got your breakthrough. That's the kind of outcome that makes a hater wake up at night and replay old moments, wondering where it all slipped away. You might be thinking, why are they acting weird now? Why are they quiet now? Why do they suddenly care? Because your progress exposed the truth they tried to hide. They never had power over you. They only had access to you. They only had your attention. They only had your need to explain. And once you took that back, they lost the only weapon they ever had. Let's get something straight, my dear chosen ones. You don't shut people down with arguments. You shut them down with standards, with boundaries, with results, with that calm, unbothered energy that says, I'm not here to wrestle in the dirt with anyone. And for insecure people, that feels like disrespect. Not because you did something wrong, because you stopped giving them what they were stealing. Here's a quote for the ones who tried to label you. Confidence looks like arrogance to people who survive on doubt. They called you cold because you stopped being available. They called you distant because you stopped being convenient. They called you changed because the version of you they could manipulate doesn't live here anymore. And listen, chosen ones, being chosen doesn't mean you're better than everyone. It means you're built different under pressure. It means you don't crumble the way they expected. It means when life hits, you don't beg for mercy. You build muscle. It means you can lose things and still keep your identity. That's why you scare them, because you are living proof that setbacks don't end a person. They shape them. Imagine a crowd throwing stones at a wall they thought was cracked, and then realizing it's reinforced steel. That's what your comeback felt like to them. Every jab they threw, you turned it into discipline. Every rejection, you turned it into precision. Every betrayal, you turned it into awareness. They thought they were weakening you, but all they did was train you. And now you walk into rooms like a calm storm, quiet but undeniable, like you've been through enough to stop flinching. So if you're wondering, should I respond? Should I explain? Should I defend myself? Let this answer settle. You don't owe clarity to people committed to misunderstanding you. Your silence is not weakness. It's strategy, it's restraint, it's power under control. And here's the part that hits your enemies right in the ego. You didn't beat them by fighting. You beat them by refusing to be pulled into their chaos. That's why they're stunned. Because they prepared for war, and you never showed up to the battlefield. You outgrew the arena. Chosen ones, before we move any further, take a second to lock this energy in. If this message hit you, if it put words to what you've been feeling, if it reminded you of the strength you've been carrying quietly, then support this movement by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Every like tells us to keep going. Every subscription helps us keep putting in the work to bring you powerful, motivating, life-shifting content like this. This isn't just support for a channel, it's fuel for a space built to sharpen minds, strengthen confidence, and remind you who you are. Stay connected. That's the idiom they can't stand. You let the results do the talking. You let your glow do the explaining. You let your growth become the answer. And now they're stuck, choking on the sound of their own empty noise while you keep moving like you've got somewhere to be. Chosen ones, if this is hitting where it needs to hit, tap like and subscribe, because this isn't just a video, it's a reminder. And drop 777 in the comments if you're ready to keep that same energy. No explanations, no chasing, no begging, just elevation. Because the haters are stunned, and you shut it down like a pro, and you're not finished. Chosen ones, before we move any further, take a second to lock this energy in. If this message hit you, if it put words to what you've been feeling, if it reminded you of the strength you've been carrying quietly, then support this movement by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Every like tells us to keep going. Every subscription helps us keep putting in the work to bring you powerful, motivating, life-shifting content like this. This isn't just support for a channel, it's fuel for a space built to sharpen minds, strengthen confidence, and remind you who you are. Stay connected. And before we move forward, pause right here with me. Chosen ones. If this message feels personal, if it sounds like it's been watching your life unfold in real time, that's not coincidence, it's alignment. Your support keeps this space alive. Hitting like and subscribing isn't just a click, it's a signal that this kind of focused, high-impact energy matters. Drop 77 in the comments if you know you've been shutting things down quietly while others stay stunned. If you want to go further, show love through super thanks and help us keep raising the bar. And now, let's dive into this step by step, because if you're truly chosen, you'll recognize every sign. And before we move forward, pause right here with me, chosen ones. If this message feels personal, if it sounds like it's been watching your life unfold in real time, that's not coincidence, it's alignment. Your support keeps this space alive. Hitting like and subscribing isn't just a click, it's a signal that this kind of focused, high-impact energy matters. Drop 77 in the comments if you know you've been shutting things down quietly while others stay stunned. If you want to go further, show love through super thanks and help us keep raising the bar. And now, let's dive into this step by step, because if you're truly chosen, you'll recognize every sign. Number 1. When weak pressure collides with unbreakable force. When fragile hands swing at solid steel. People don't attack what they can defeat. They attack what reminds them they never could. My dear chosen ones, this is where it starts to make sense. This is the moment you stop asking yourself why the jealousy was so loud, why the resistance felt personal, why the shade came out of nowhere the second you started moving differently. Let me say it clearly, so it lands where it needs to land. Envy isn't loud because it's powerful. Envy is loud because it's weak, exposed, and panicking. It makes noise because silence would force it to face the truth. And here's the truth your enemies choke on every single day. You were never the problem. You were the comparison they couldn't survive. Think about it. They didn't turn on you when you were struggling. They didn't come for you when you were quiet, unsure, or rebuilding. The tension started when you stabilized, when your posture changed, when your voice got calmer, when you stopped explaining and started executing. That's when the whispers started. That's when the looks changed. That's when they suddenly had opinions about your character, your choices, your path. Why? Because your presence forced them to confront the version of themselves they've been avoiding for years. Chosen ones, imagine standing in front of a mirror and instead of fixing what you don't like, you punch the glass and blame the reflection. That's envy. That's what they did with you. You became the mirror. Your growth reflected their stagnation. Your discipline exposed their excuses. Your consistency highlighted their laziness. And instead of leveling up, they lashed out. Let this quote sink in. When people can't reach your level, they try to pull your name down to theirs. That wasn't strategy. That was desperation. They tried gossip because words were the only tools they had. They leaned on whispers because they had no results. Weak people attack reputations. Strong people build reality. And you, chosen one, were too busy building to notice at first. That's why it backfired. Every rumor they spread didn't weaken you, it exposed them. Every insult was a confession. Every petty move screamed, "I can't compete with this." You didn't build your identity on their approval. They built theirs on attention. That's the difference. Their self-worth is a sand castle waiting for the tide. You're reinforced steel. Pressure doesn't erode you, it proves you. Picture someone screaming at a mountain, hoping the echo will crack the stone. That's how ridiculous their attacks were. They threw shade thinking it would dim your progress, but all it did was reveal how empty they were inside. You didn't just survive their envy, you became immune to it. And that's what scares them most. Here's another line they'll never admit hurts. Your success didn't offend them, it humiliated them. Because it proved that growth was always an option, and they chose not to take it. Chosen ones, you might be asking yourself right now, why does their jealousy feel so intense? Why does it seem personal? Because people can tolerate many things, but they cannot tolerate being exposed without consent. And your progress did exactly that. Not with noise, not with arrogance, just by existing at a higher standard. You carry a kind of pressure others can't stand. Not loud, not flashy, focused, controlled, relentless. You don't just glow, you reveal. You show who's real and who's pretending, who's disciplined and who's comfortable, who's growing and who's stuck. And people built on fragile egos cannot survive that kind of heat. They don't understand your calm. They mistake it for arrogance. They don't understand your boundaries. They call it ego. They don't understand how you can walk through chaos without falling apart. To them, composure looks threatening because they've never had it. Imagine someone throwing rocks at a reinforced glass wall, getting angrier with every throw while the surface doesn't even crack. That's you, and the sound they hear? That's their own frustration echoing back at them. Here's the part that cuts the deepest. You didn't fight them, you didn't chase them, you didn't explain yourself. You shut them down by existing, by surviving, by staying focused, by refusing to collapse on schedule. They expected tears, they expected panic, they expected you to react so they could feel important again. But you walked away, and that silence, that was the knockout. Because insecure people depend on access. When you pulled your energy back, they lost their supply, they lost their audience, they lost the emotional leverage they were feeding on. And without it, everything they built collapsed. While they were busy plotting, replaying, gossiping and spiraling, you kept moving, you kept sharpening, you kept elevating, not loudly, not publicly, efficiently. Picture this final image, chosen ones. A group of people digging a hole, convinced you'll fall into it, laughing, cheering, certain of your downfall, and then one day they look up and realize they're the ones trapped, while you're standing above ground, dusting yourself off like nothing happened. That's envy. It always backfires. They watch you now with confusion and fear, trying to understand how someone they tried to bury became untouchable. They scroll, they analyze, they replay the past, searching for a moment where they had control. But the truth keeps hitting them the same way. You were never under their power. They only had access, and now they have neither. Their bitterness isn't your burden, it's their consequence. Their jealousy isn't your weight, it's their chain. Let them drown in their own noise. You don't need to respond. Every time they speak your name, they reinforce the reality they hate. You've already won, chosen one. You're not just standing, you're solid, and fragile hands don't bend steel. Number 2, loud voices are always hiding thin foundations. Loud mouths, hollow power. Noise is what weakness uses when strength is missing. My dear chosen ones, this is where the illusion finally cracks. This is where you stop mistaking volume for authority and start seeing noise for what it really is. A last-ditch signal of panic. People don't scream because they're winning. They scream because they're losing control. And the louder they get, the more obvious it becomes that they have nothing solid to stand on. Look at it clearly now. Their gossip, their comments, their side conversations, their sudden opinions about you, none of it is confidence. It's a tantrum wearing a brave face. It's frustration disguised as boldness. It's fear trying to sound important. Every time they raise their voice, they're admitting something they'll never say directly. You make them uncomfortable because you moved past the version of you they could understand. Chosen ones, they don't hate you because you hurt them. They hate you because you escaped the box they put you in. You were supposed to stay predictable. You were supposed to stay explainable. You were supposed to play the role they assigned you so they could feel secure in their own limits. And the moment you stepped outside that script, they panicked. When people lose control of the narrative, they raise the volume. Here's a truth that cuts straight through the noise. Weak people don't attack because they're brave. They attack because they're terrified of being exposed. And you exposed them without saying a word. Every step you took forward cracked their armor. Every sign of growth reminded them of what they avoided. Every moment of calm made their chaos look ridiculous. Picture someone standing in a dark room, waving their arms wildly, hoping their shadow looks big enough to scare someone. That's what their noise is. A performance, a distraction, a desperate attempt to look powerful while feeling small. Strip away the sound, and there's nothing underneath. No influence, no control, no real impact. Notice how they never come alone. They gather, they whisper, they huddle in groups, repeating the same lines to each other, trying to convince themselves they're still relevant. Alone, they're quiet. Together, they pretend to be bold, but their collective roar doesn't shake anything real. It just keeps their fragile confidence from collapsing. Broken mirrors always need tape to stay upright. Chosen ones, ask yourself this. Why is your name always in their mouths? Why do their conversations circle back to you? Why does your progress live rent-free in their thoughts? Because without you, they have nothing to talk about. Without you, their stories fall flat. Without you, they're forced to look inward, and that's the one place they refuse to go. Here's another line they'll never admit is true. Hate is admiration that couldn't handle the truth. They watch you like fans, but call it criticism. They study you like students, but disguise it as judgment. They're searching for a flaw that justifies why they didn't do what you did. But all they find is distance, a gap they can't close no matter how loudly they shout. They think their hate is powerful. In reality, it's dependent. It needs your reaction to survive. It feeds on your attention. It breathes through your engagement. The moment you stopped responding, it started suffocating. The moment you stayed silent, it began collapsing. The moment you focused on your own lane, it lost its pulse. Imagine them pounding on a locked door, shouting your name, demanding your attention, convinced you're still inside. What they don't realize is that you walked out the back door long ago. You moved on, you leveled up, you shifted priorities. and now they're screaming at an empty room, furious that the echo is all they get back. That silence, it tortures them. They wanted you angry, defensive, rattled. They wanted a reaction so they could feel relevant again, but you didn't give it to them. You stayed grounded, you stayed focused, you kept building. And that restraint, that control, is the one thing they can't compete with. Let this quote settle in. Your silence is the consequence they never recover from. Understand this, chosen ones. They were never trying to destroy you. They were trying to distract you. Noise was their only strategy because action requires discipline, and discipline was never their strength. While they spun in circles, you kept moving forward. While they talked, you worked. While they obsessed, you progressed. They call themselves haters, but let's be honest, they're observers who can't look away. They comment because silence forces self-reflection. They gossip because growth would require effort. They talk because becoming better would mean admitting they stayed the same. Imagine someone at the bottom of a hill throwing rocks upward, hoping to stop someone already climbing higher. The rocks don't reach you. They fall back down. That's how insecurity works. It turns on itself. Their noise exposes their fear. Their fear exposes their weakness. Their weakness exposes the gap between you and them. A gap that volume will never close. Chosen ones, your strength was never built on approval. It was built on consistency, on endurance, on choosing progress when excuses were easier. That's why they don't understand you. They've never carried weight without complaining. They've never improved without announcing it. They've never faced themselves without blaming someone else. So let them talk, let them spiral, let them drown in their own noise. You're not built for their small games. You're built for distance, for elevation, for outcomes they can't imagine. And the louder they get, the clearer it becomes. You shut it down like a pro, and they never stood a chance. Number 3, they tried to start a fight. You controlled the entire field. They picked a fight. You owned the whole playing field. Nothing humiliates an opponent more than realizing the person they tried to battle never even stepped into the ring. Chosen ones, let's break this open properly, because this is where the shift became undeniable. They came at you loud, tense, ready for conflict, convinced they could pull you into their chaos and beat you on familiar ground. They thought pressure would shake you. They thought gossip would corner you. They thought noise would drag you down into the mud where they feel comfortable. What they didn't realize is this. The field they were trying to fight on already belonged to you. Long before they showed up, you had the high ground. That's the mistake they'll never recover from. They mistook your calm for weakness. They mistook your silence for fear. They mistook your distance for avoidance. But chosen ones, silence from someone focused is not retreat. It's positioning. While they were warming up for a fight, you were already operating on a different level, solving bigger problems, building longer-term outcomes, moving with intent instead of emotion. Picture this clearly. A group of amateurs throwing wild punches into empty air, sweating, shouting, convinced they're in a fight, while the person they're obsessed with is on a completely different floor of the building, too busy leveling up to even hear the noise. That's you. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting the idea of you, shadowboxing their own insecurity, competing with a version of themselves they never had the discipline to become. Their strategy was simple and predictable: provoke, poke, bait, trigger. They wanted a reaction. They wanted you angry, defensive, emotional. They wanted to see you break character so they could feel relevant again. But every attempt to pull you in was met with something they couldn't process. Nothing, no response, no explanation, no energy. And that silence cut deeper than any comeback ever could. Here's a truth they'll never say out loud. You didn't win a fight. You exposed that there was never a fight to begin with. While they were busy talking, you were building. While they were obsessing over your name, you were stacking results. While they were trying to manufacture chaos, you were constructing stability piece by piece. They were playing checkers in a corner, focused on quick moves and cheap wins. You were designing the entire board, controlling the space, deciding where the game even exists. Think about this metaphor. Someone throwing dirt at the sun, convinced it will dim the light. That's what their hate was. And every handful they threw didn't touch you. It fell right back on them. Their words didn't weaken you. They exposed themselves, because hate needs reaction to survive, and you starved it completely. Chosen ones understand this clearly. People who thrive on conflict collapse in the presence of indifference. They feed on attention. They depend on emotional engagement. Without your reaction, their power evaporates. Their attacks hit empty space and come back echoing with nothing but their own frustration. And when that happened, they realized something that terrified them. You weren't ignoring them because you were scared. You were ignoring them because they were beneath your focus. Let this quote settle in. A calm mind is the sharpest weapon. It dismantles illusions without ever swinging. Your focus became your blade. Your restraint became dominance. Your discipline cut deeper than any argument could. They hate that you kept building while they kept talking. They hate that you never explained yourself. They hate that you never defended yourself. They hate that your progress continued no matter how loudly they screamed your name. Your silence wasn't avoidance, it was control, it was psychological mastery, and they walked straight into it. Imagine them now, holding a megaphone, shouting your name, desperate for acknowledgement, while you've already walked miles ahead, committed to a path they can't even see. Their voices fade, their relevance shrinks, their stories start contradicting each other. They're stuck in the ruins of a battle that only ever existed in their minds. Here's another truth that stings. They didn't lose because you beat them. They lost because they were never even on your level to begin with. Chosen ones, the reason they're still talking is because they can't accept how easily you dismantled their entire plan. You didn't retaliate, you didn't entertain, you didn't descend. You outclassed them simply by staying in your lane and moving forward. That kind of defeat doesn't bruise the ego, it breaks the illusion. Let them drown in their frustration. Let them spin stories that collapse under their own weight. They wanted a war, but you built the entire arena and walked away before the first punch was thrown. You're not here to wrestle with small minds. You're here to rise, to build, to operate in spaces they can't reach. Keep moving, chosen ones. They're still trying to start a fight, but you're already ruling the whole field. Number 4. Erased without a confrontation, written out without a goodbye. Nothing unsettles a pretender more than realizing the story moved on without them. Chosen ones, this is where the truth gets uncomfortable for the people who thought they mattered more than they did. The ones who once spoke the loudest, who acted like they had a permanent seat in your life, who behaved as if your journey somehow depended on their commentary. For a long time, they convinced themselves they were important, that they were involved, that they had influence. But now the realization has hit, and it's brutal. They were never part of the real story, not the struggle, not the growth, not the rise. They were background noise pretending to be essential. You didn't silence them. You didn't confront them. You didn't even acknowledge them. You simply grew, and that growth erased them. Picture a movie where random extras suddenly believe the entire film revolves around them. They start improvising lines, stepping into scenes they were never cast for, talking over moments that aren't theirs. But when the story actually progresses, the camera doesn't follow them. They get cropped out, blurred, forgotten. That's exactly what happened when you stepped fully into who you are. The spotlight they thought they stood in was never real. It only existed because you hadn't yet walked into your own. What crushed them wasn't rejection. It was irrelevance. They didn't lose their place because you pushed them out. They lost it because the next chapter had no use for them. They were surviving on access, feeding on your attention, your reactions, your explanations. They confused volume with value, noise with importance, and as long as you were listening, they felt alive. But the moment you pulled your focus back, their identity collapsed. They had no role without your energy to orbit. That's why they spiral now. That's why their words sound desperate instead of confident. That's why their gossip feels hollow. They don't know who they are without you paying attention. Imagine someone still performing on a stage after the lights have been shut off. They're delivering lines with passion, gesturing dramatically, convinced they're being watched, while the audience has already left the building. That's them, acting for ghosts, trying to stay relevant in a story that has already moved theaters. Your life is no longer the stage they can perform on, and they can feel it. Their commentary is static, their shade is recycled insecurity. Every attempt they make to insert themselves back into your narrative only highlights the truth they're trying to escape. They were never part of the script. They scribbled themselves into the margins and mistook that for importance. Chosen ones, your rise didn't just quiet them, it made them invisible. And invisibility terrifies people who depend on being seen to feel real. They sense they've been written out. They feel the distance growing. That's why they reach. That's why they talk louder. That's why they exaggerate their connection to you. They're clawing at relevance that no longer exists. But you've evolved past the point where their opinions even register. You're building things their perspective can't comprehend. You're moving in spaces they'll never access. And when you glance back, all you notice is a faint echo of noise that once felt loud. That's what growth does. It turns former distractions into distant shadows from outdated chapters. Here's the truth they won't admit. When you healed, their influence ended. Your life is no longer a dumping ground for their insecurities. You've seen too much, learned too much, endured too much to fall for the same patterns again. While they scramble for attention, you're constructing a life that doesn't include them at all. And the part that breaks them the most is this. You didn't fight them, you didn't expose them, you didn't drag them publicly, you didn't need revenge. You simply walked away and chose yourself. That choice was louder than any argument. That elevation was colder than any comeback. That silence was final. Now they're stuck replaying moments you barely remember, rewriting history to convince themselves they mattered. They analyze your moves, attach themselves to old memories, trying to reclaim relevance. But the more they talk, the clearer it becomes. They're no longer characters of consequence. They're not villains. They're not threats. They're leftover names from a chapter that already closed. So keep moving, chosen ones. Keep building, keep rising. Let them fade into footnotes. Your story doesn't pause for people who were never meant to survive the edit. And that quiet disappearance, that invisibility, is the outcome they will never recover from. Number 5. The collapse that happens when attention is cut off, when the leech loses its host. My dear chosen ones, this is one of the most uncomfortable truths for the people who tried to stay attached to you, because it exposes how little power they ever had on their own. They were never strong by themselves. They were strong because they were feeding on you. Every outburst they staged, every rumor they spread, every chaotic move they pulled was never about confidence or control. It was about extraction. They were siphoning energy from your reactions, your emotions, your explanations, your willingness to engage. And the moment you stopped supplying that energy, everything they built collapsed like a structure with no foundation. Here's what they hoped you'd never realize. Chaos was their oxygen. Drama was their currency. Provocation was their survival strategy. They needed friction to feel alive because stillness would force them to face how empty things were inside. That's why they circled you constantly, like moths around a flame, pretending they had their own light. But moths don't glow, they borrow. And the second you stepped back, the second you stopped entertaining their nonsense, their wings burned out. That loud confidence they wore so proudly vanished overnight, because it was never real to begin with. It was borrowed heat. Chosen ones understand this clearly. They weren't fighters, they weren't rivals, they were scavengers. They survived by feeding on your kindness, your patience, your empathy, and sometimes even your pain. Their biggest fear wasn't confrontation, it was irrelevance. And the moment you chose peace over provocation, that fear became reality. You starved them without lifting a finger. You shut off the emotional faucet they had been draining dry for years. They expected resistance. They expected arguments. They expected you to chase clarity or defend your name. Instead, you gave them silence. And silence is brutal to people who depend on attention to exist. Here's a line that lands hard. Watch how fast people fall apart when your reactions stop paying their bills. Without your engagement, their influence vanished. Without your focus, their words lost weight. Without your energy holding their mess together, they had nothing left to stand on. They weren't strong without your attention. They weren't relevant without your presence. They weren't anything without access to you. And once that access was gone, the cracks became impossible to hide. Now imagine them where they are today, pacing, guessing, gossiping, replaying old scenes in their heads because they can't create new ones without you. Their chaos machine is out of fuel. Their usual tricks don't land anymore. Their words don't sting. Their theatrics don't spark reactions. They're clawing at the air, trying to recreate the drama that once made them feel important. But the audience is gone, the stage is empty, and they're stuck performing for nobody. Chosen ones, here's the real punch they can't recover from. The moment you healed, their influence died. Not slowly, instantly. You moved forward, fueled by your own strength, while they shrank under the weight of their own emptiness. They tried to drain you, but you cut the cord. And when that happened, they didn't just lose you, they lost themselves. Because people who build their identity around leeching off others have nothing left when the source disappears. This is why they keep watching from a distance now, quietly, desperately, trying to figure out how you slipped away so cleanly. You didn't announce your exit, you didn't make a scene, you simply grew. And growth is impossible to chase when someone refuses to slow down for you. You're moving in a direction they can't follow, not because you're hiding, but because they lack the capacity to keep up. Let this settle in, chosen ones. Their downfall wasn't caused by you attacking them. It was caused by you choosing yourself, by redirecting your energy inward, by investing in your stability instead of their chaos, by understanding that not every fight deserves your presence. You didn't abandon them. You outgrew the dynamic they needed to survive. Now they're ghosts behind you, fading further with every step you take, stuck in a narrative that no longer includes them, replaying moments you've already forgotten. Keep going. Don't look back. They can't follow where your growth is taking you, and that distance is the proof that you shut it down like a pro. Number 6. The power of saying nothing and watching everything fall apart. The thunder hidden in your quiet. Silence from a powerful person is never empty. It's pressure without noise. It's control without chaos. And my dear chosen ones, this is the point where everything cracked for them without you lifting a single finger. They walked toward you expecting a fight. They were hungry for friction, addicted to drama, desperate for a reaction because chaos is the only place they feel important. They wanted sparks, flames, explosions. But instead of matching their noise, you met it with stillness. And that stillness didn't calm them, it terrified them. Because silence from someone who knows their worth isn't absence, it's dominance. Picture this clearly. They threw insults like stones into what they thought was shallow water, waiting for a loud splash. But what they hit was depth, no sound. No echo, no response, just a bottomless drop that swallowed every attempt whole. That's what your silence felt like to them. Not weakness, not fear, a void, an unresponsive space that refused to give them meaning. They believed your power lived in your words, in your explanations, in your reactions. They were wrong. Your power lives in restraint, in discernment, in knowing exactly when silence does more damage than any sentence ever could. Chosen ones, here's the truth they can't process. The loudest response from a strong person is the one they never give. While they gossiped, plotted, and tried to provoke you into their tiny, crowded battlefield, you stayed focused on what actually matters: your growth, your direction, your momentum. You didn't flinch, you didn't pause, you didn't stop to explain yourself to people who already decided not to understand you. And that broke them in ways no comeback ever could. Because when someone is addicted to drama, your refusal to participate feels like suffocation. Drama addicts can't survive without an audience. They perform for reactions. They breathe through validation, and you walked out of the arena entirely. You didn't just leave them talking to themselves, you forced them to hear themselves. Your silence became a mirror, and what they saw staring back wasn't flattering. Insecurities they buried started echoing. Doubts they avoided got louder. The fake confidence they wrapped themselves in began to collapse under its own weight. They spiraled not because you attacked them, but because you didn't play the role they assigned you. Think about it. They wrote a script where you were supposed to respond, defend, explain, or break. And when you didn't follow the script, the entire production fell apart. Imagine someone screaming into an empty room, waiting for applause that never comes. That's where they are now, performing without relevance, speaking without impact, existing without influence. Meanwhile, you're moving forward, calm, focused, elevated, while they're stuck replaying the same moment, trying to understand how they lost control. Chosen ones, this is where the title comes alive. The haters are stunned because you shut it down like a pro. Not with force, not with noise, with discipline, with silence, with composure. You didn't wrestle in the mud. You didn't lower yourself into emotional chaos. You chose peace over pettiness, and that choice erased them more effectively than any confrontation ever could, because their power depended on your engagement. The second you stopped feeding it, it evaporated. Here's a hit they'll never admit out loud. Your silence didn't just ignore them, it removed them. It stripped them of relevance. Their words died in the vacuum of your indifference. Their attempts lost traction. Their influence disappeared. They realized too late that they weren't fighting you. They were fighting the reality that you had already moved on. And that's the thunder hidden in your quiet, chosen ones. Not empty, not passive, strategic, final. You didn't announce your strength. You demonstrated it by refusing to waste it. You didn't shout. You advanced. You didn't react. You rose. And now everything they tried to throw at you sits behind you, powerless, while you keep moving forward untouched. Keep going, chosen one. Your silence already shook them. Your success will finish what restraint started. Number 7. Your progress exposed what they were hiding. Brighter than their shadows could hide. Chosen ones, understand this clearly. Your light didn't expose their flaws. It exposed the lies they told themselves about who they were, and that is far more uncomfortable than being criticized. Let's pull this truth into the open where it belongs. They weren't talking because you failed. They weren't whispering because you did something wrong. They were talking because your presence made it impossible for them to keep hiding from themselves. You didn't overpower them. You didn't dominate them. You simply existed at a level they couldn't fake anymore, and that alone cracked their ego straight down the middle. People who spend their lives surviving in dim corners panic when someone walks in glowing without asking permission. Not glowing loudly, not glowing arrogantly, glowing naturally, confidently, unapologetically. Your presence didn't just get noticed. It landed. It hit them in the chest like a sudden realization they weren't prepared for. Imagine a room full of people pretending they've got everything under control, pretending they're confident, pretending they've figured life out. The moment you walk in, the temperature changes. Conversations pause, energy shifts, masks start slipping, smiles tighten, because your energy doesn't shout, it reveals. That's what unsettles them, exposure. Your presence acts like a mirror they didn't consent to look into. Every insecurity they buried under noise, ego, or comparison starts scratching at the surface the second you arrive. They see you standing firm, comfortable in yourself, moving with quiet certainty. And suddenly all the stories they told themselves about being ahead, better, or unbothered start collapsing. That's why the gossip starts, not as information, but as panic. Like a flare fired into the air saying, something here is threatening my illusion. Here's the truth they avoid at all costs. Your success didn't make them feel small. It revealed the smallness they were already drowning in. You didn't shrink to make them comfortable. You expanded. You didn't dim your voice to blend in. You strengthened it. You didn't apologize for being visible. You allowed yourself to be seen. And that visibility acted like a spotlight, landing directly on the insecurities they spent years running from. Chosen ones, picture this. Someone standing on the shore throwing pebbles at a lighthouse, hoping it will go dark. That's what their shade looks like. Ridiculous, ineffective, desperate. Your light was never powered by their approval. It was built through effort, shaped by pressure, refined through struggle, and strengthened by purpose. They could beg the shadows for backup, and it still wouldn't matter. You don't shine because they allow it. You shine because you earned it. Every win you secured burned away another illusion they clung to. Every step forward you took exposed how long they've been standing still. That's why they whisper. Not to hurt you, but to distract themselves from the mirror you became without trying. Your brilliance didn't just blind them, it revealed them. And instead of stepping up, instead of doing the work, instead of growing, they chose the easier route. Gossip over growth, shade over self-reflection, noise over transformation. Let them choose comfort. Let them stay where hiding feels safe. That's not your responsibility. Chosen ones, hear this clearly. You are not obligated to dim yourself to protect someone else's ego. You are not required to shrink so others can feel tall. You are not responsible for managing the emotional reactions of people who refuse to manage themselves. Your only responsibility is to keep moving forward with integrity, discipline, and focus. And that's what truly stuns them. You didn't slow down to explain. You didn't pause to reassure. You didn't stop shining to make things fair. You kept going, calm, collected, certain. While they scrambled to rewrite narratives, you wrote progress. While they analyzed your every move, you stayed busy building. While they stayed trapped in comparison, you stayed locked in purpose. Your light doesn't chase attention. It commands space. It changes rooms without speaking. It unsettles fragile egos without lifting a finger. And that's why they'll never forget it. Because long after the noise fades, long after the gossip dies, long after the shadows retreat, your presence remains burned into their memory as the moment they realized pretending was no longer enough. Keep shining, chosen ones, not to prove anything, but because dimming yourself was never part of who you are. Number 8. Control. Lost the moment you stopped reacting. When the mask cracks under real pressure. People don't hate what scares them. They hate what they can't control. Chosen ones, this is where the truth gets uncomfortable for them, so let's pull it into the open and leave it there. Everything they did to you, the rumors, the side comments, the half-truths, the exaggerated stories whispered behind your back, none of it came from confidence. It wasn't strength. It wasn't dominance. It was fear. Fear dressed up like anger, fear hiding behind sarcasm, fear trying to sound brave while shaking underneath. They didn't come for you because you were weak. They came for you because you walked into the room becoming exactly what they hoped you never would. Unbreakable, self-contained, hard to read, harder to manipulate. The moment you stopped folding under pressure, the moment you stopped shrinking to keep others comfortable, their panic kicked in. Because control only works on people who doubt themselves, and you stopped doing that. Picture this clearly, chosen ones. Imagine them wearing a mask painted with confidence, judgment, and superiority. They wear it well when the room is dim, when no one questions them, when you're quiet or struggling. But pressure cracks masks, and you became pressure without raising your voice. You stood your ground. You didn't explain. You didn't apologize. You didn't perform for approval. And that's when their illusion shattered, not loudly, internally, where it hurts the most. You became the mirror they never wanted to stand in front of, and suddenly they weren't reacting to you. They were reacting to themselves. Every insecurity they buried, every excuse they leaned on, every chance they didn't take. Your presence forced them to see it all, and that scared them more than anything you ever said or did. Here's the truth they'll never swallow easily. Every insult they threw was a confession. Every jab revealed what they feared becoming. Every lie they spread exposed what they were hiding. They whispered because silence terrifies people who don't like who they are when no one is watching. Gossip became their armor. Rumors became their shield. But it was paper thin, and your consistency tore straight through it. Notice how the harder they tried to dim you, the brighter you got. That wasn't coincidence. That was pressure exposing weakness. Every step you took forward cracked another layer of their confidence. Every win you earned made their stability feel fake. They wanted your downfall not because you threatened them directly, but because your rise reminded them they chose comfort over growth. Imagine someone throwing rocks at a mountain, screaming, exhausted, emotional, while the mountain doesn't move an inch. That's what it looked like from the outside. They threw shade, they projected, they lied, they tried to provoke, and you didn't budge. Mountains don't answer the wind, chosen ones, and neither do you anymore. That's when their fear deepened, because they realized something dangerous. They lost control. You didn't react. You didn't justify. You didn't feed their ego with attention. You walked past them like they were background noise, and the moment they understood they couldn't shake you, panic set in. Ask yourself this, chosen ones. Why obsess over someone you claim is irrelevant? Why watch their moves? Why replay their past? Why try so hard to pull them down? Because your existence exposes a truth they can't outrun. You are what they pretend to be. Your authenticity unmasks their performance. Your strength highlights their fragility. Your progress exposes how long they've been standing still. You became a walking reminder of courage they never acted on and risks they never took. And instead of doing the work, they lashed out. They hoped their noise would drown out the sound of your progress. But all it did was amplify their desperation. Hate doesn't weaken you. It spotlights them. Their bitterness is a megaphone announcing their fear to anyone paying attention. Look at them now, hiding in the same shadows they once felt safe in, watching you move with a confidence they can't imitate. Their words don't land anymore. Their tactics feel tired. Their attempts to shake you bounce back and shake them instead. That's the cost of building an identity on control. It collapses the moment control is gone. Here's the final truth they'll never admit out loud. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting the realization that they can't stop you. Chosen ones, you don't need to swing back. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to descend into chaos to prove anything. Your silence hits harder than any comeback. Your progress dismantles whatever ego they have left. Your calm exposes every crack they tried to hide. Let them talk. Let them scramble. Let them wear that mask until it crumbles in their own hands. You're already ahead, already rising, already untouchable. Keep moving forward. Their fear was never your burden, but your light will always be their truth. Number 9. The rewrite where they no longer exist in the story. The rewrite that left them behind. Nothing rattles a hater more than discovering the story didn't pause without them. It kept moving and somehow got better. Chosen ones, this is the moment everything clicks. This is where you realize you didn't just survive their interference. You rewrote the entire narrative in a way they can never touch. They thought they were part of the plot. They thought their opinions mattered. They thought their noise had weight. And then one day, they looked up and realized the story moved on without asking for their permission. They tried to cast you as the villain because it was the only way they could feel important in their own small world. They needed you to be the problem so they could avoid being accountable for their stagnation. But here's the rule they forgot, and you've always lived by it. You don't exist in their story. They exist in yours. And even that was temporary. While they were scribbling lies in the margins, you were writing entire chapters of discipline, growth, and execution. While they were obsessed with controlling perception, you were building substance. They dragged your name through mud like children pressing crayons into paper, convinced they were ruining something valuable. But they never touched the canvas. You were creating miles above their reach, shaping a reality that didn't include their approval. They played with pencils. You wrote with force. Here's the truth that burns them the most. They never defined you, not once. They only exposed themselves. Every rumor was projection. Every accusation was a confession. Every attempt to twist your image was really an attempt to escape the mirror your presence held up. Blaming you made their lack of effort easier to swallow. Painting you as the obstacle gave them an excuse not to move. It was easier to criticize your rise than confront their refusal to climb. But the moment you stopped reacting, everything collapsed. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, the moment you stopped bending to narratives that didn't serve you, their entire script caught fire. You didn't argue. You didn't correct the record. You didn't fight for understanding. You rose. And when you rise high enough, the story doesn't revolve around the noise anymore. It adjusts around your progress. Chosen ones, imagine this clearly. They're clinging to old chapters, rereading scenes that no longer exist, trying to make sense of a role they assumed was permanent. But the pages moved on. The plot evolved. You entered new arcs, stronger, sharper, more intentional, and they were left behind, stuck in a footnote, hoping someone still cares enough to read it. Here's a line they'll never admit hurts. You didn't erase them. Relevance simply expired. Their gossip is static, their shade is dust. Their attempts to claim they knew the real you are almost funny now. They wanted control, but you grew beyond the reach of their hands. They wanted influence, but you leveled up past the range of their voice. Picture someone flipping through a book, searching for themselves in the story, only to realize they disappeared after page 2. That's them. No confrontation required, no announcement needed. You erased their influence simply by improving your position. Your rise outpaced their lies. Your consistency crushed their illusions. Your success forced a rewrite they couldn't edit. And the more they talk now, the clearer it becomes. They no longer have a seat at your table. They don't have a role in your movie. They don't have a line in your legacy. They're spectators at best, watching from the sidelines they earned through inaction. Their words don't reach you. Their opinions don't register. Their presence doesn't alter your direction. Chosen ones, let them sit with the distance between who you were and who you've become. Let that gap speak for itself. You don't need revenge when growth does the job better. You don't need validation when progress is visible. You don't need closure when the chapter is closed. You're not the villain they tried to paint. You're the main character they underestimated, and they're ghosts. They're fading out of pages that stopped being theirs a long time ago. Your story is moving forward with precision, momentum, and clarity, and this rewrite isn't finished yet. And as we bring this part to a close, let this settle in, chosen ones. Everything you've witnessed, the silence, the tension, the stunned reactions, was proof that you handled it with control, not chaos. You shut it down like a pro, and they felt it. If this message spoke to your experience, support this space by hitting like and subscribing so this kind of powerful content keeps coming. Drop 77 in the comments if you're moving forward unbothered, and share this with another chosen one who needs the reminder. Stay focused, stay rising, and keep letting results speak.